They always said she was difficult, too sensitive, too dramatic. But what if the problem was never her? What if the family she trusted was the stage, and she was cast as the villain in a script she didn't write? This is the story of how reality gets rewritten inside narcissistic families, where truth is twisted, love is weaponized, and the scapegoat becomes the sacrifice. But also, the survivor. Because sometimes the one they called too much is the one who sees too clearly. And once she stops believing their version of her, everything changes. This isn't just her story, it might be yours too. She never asked to play the villain, not once. And yet, from the moment she could speak her own mind, it was as if the script had already been written. She could feel it long before she understood it, an unspoken story etched into every family gathering, every sideways glance, every silence that swallowed her voice. The moment she questioned a contradiction, they tensed. The moment she cried a little too long, laughed a little too loud, or dared to speak a truth that made them uncomfortable, the air shifted. She was marked, branded, not for what she did, but for what she saw, the one who noticed too much. In a narcissistic family system, love is never unconditional. It's a contract, silent, unspoken, and signed in childhood. There are roles assigned early, like parts in a play. The golden child who can do no wrong, the enabler who keeps the peace at all costs, the invisible one who disappears to survive. And then there's the scapegoat, the one who absorbs all the dysfunction, all the shadows no one else wants to carry. That was her, but she didn't know it yet. All she knew was that she felt different, isolated, like she was always one misstep away from being blamed for something she didn't understand. Like she was constantly trying to prove she wasn't what they said she was, and somehow, always failing. It wasn't loud, this kind of harm. It was subtle, whispered, a steady erosion of reality. She was told she was too emotional, too sensitive, too dramatic, but no one ever asked what she was responding to. They said she was imagining things, that she remembered wrong, that she had a problem with authority, that she ruined things. But none of that was true. What was true was that she wouldn't comply. She wouldn't go numb. She refused to pretend. That refusal, that spark of resistance, even in its smallest form, was enough to make her dangerous. Narcissistic families survive on illusion. They feed off appearances, not authenticity. And when someone within the system dares to name what's real, to say this hurts or this isn't right, they become a threat. The system reacts like any wounded animal. It attacks, it isolates, it scapegoats. And so they made her the problem. She was the one who always caused drama, the one who never appreciated anything, the one who just wanted attention. She remembers it all in flashes: the sarcastic comments, the eye rolls, the sudden silences at the dinner table. She remembers speaking her truth and being met with rage or worse, mockery. She remembers crying and being told to stop being manipulative. She remembers how quickly love was withdrawn, how quickly warmth turned cold. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she wouldn't pretend wrong was right. She didn't play her part, and that was her crime. The hardest part wasn't even the punishment. It was the gaslighting. The way they convinced her that she was imagining the fire when she was choking on smoke. The way they smiled to others presented a perfect picture, while behind closed doors, they rewrote reality. Until she couldn't trust her memory, couldn't trust her emotions, couldn't even trust herself. And so, she adapted. She smiled when she was hurting. She apologized just to end the argument. She twisted herself into versions of herself that felt safer, smaller, quieter, more pleasing. Anything to avoid being labeled difficult again. But no matter how much she shrank, they still found ways to blame her. It was a losing game, and she was the only one playing by the rules. Eventually, she stopped asking for anything at all. Years went by. Life moved forward. But the wound remained invisible, but deep. It showed up in relationships where she overgave and underreceived. It showed up in her inability to say no without guilt. It showed up in the way she second-guessed herself even when she was right. She didn't know why she felt broken, only that the break felt old, familiar, and unhealed. Then one day, something shifted. Maybe it was a conversation, a therapist's quiet nod, a podcast that put words to the ache, or a late-night Google search that brought up articles about narcissistic family dynamics, and suddenly the pattern had a name: scapegoating, enmeshment, emotional manipulation. And everything made sense. The fog began to lift. She reread the definitions again and again, not because she didn't believe them, but because they finally believed her. For the first time, someone named what she had always known: that the way she was treated wasn't love, it was control. That the way she was blamed wasn't justice, it was projection. That the role she had been assigned wasn't who she was, it was who they needed her to be so they could avoid looking at themselves. And that realization cracked something open. The grief came first. Heavy, tidal, unstoppable. Not just grief for what was done, but grief for everything she'd lost in trying to survive it. Her sense of self, her ability to trust, her childhood, her voice. But beneath the grief was something else, something small but steady, a flicker of truth, a seed of knowing. She was never the villain. She had been cast in that role, yes, painted in their colors, projected upon, but that was never her essence. Her essence was truth, sensitivity, intuition, and in a family that couldn't tolerate truth, her very being became a threat. So they called her too much, too emotional, too intense, when really, she was just unafraid to feel. She sees it now. She sees how they needed her to carry the darkness so they could pretend to be light. How they needed her to absorb their shame so they could walk free of it. How they needed her to be the unstable one so they could feel in control. But the illusion is shattered. And now, she holds the pen. She no longer needs their permission to exist. She no longer chases their approval. She no longer tries to explain what they refuse to understand, because now she believes herself. She trusts her memory. She honors her experience. And she knows deeply, fully, unshakably that she was never the villain. She was the truth teller, the mirror, the one who broke the cycle by refusing to stay asleep. And that is not a flaw. That is a gift. This is where the story begins, not with blame, but with truth. Not with anger, but with clarity. Not with revenge, but with liberation. Because once you stop playing the role they wrote for you, you begin to write your own. And that story, your real story, is just beginning. Long before she had words for it, she was learning. Not from what they said, but from what they did. From what was allowed, what was punished, what was ignored. In narcissistic families, there is a hidden curriculum, a silent school of conditioning. And she was enrolled in it from the moment she took her first breath. It doesn't teach you how to thrive. It teaches you how to survive, how to conform, how to erase yourself in order to stay close to the people who taught you love and danger in the same breath. She learned that love could be taken away, that affection was earned through performance, obedience, achievement, silence. She learned that being good meant being agreeable, compliant, easy to manage. She learned that speaking up was a threat, that questioning meant betrayal. She learned that her truth was a liability and her intuition a burden. So she tucked them away like secrets too dangerous to carry. She disconnected from her body, her anger, her instincts, all the things that made her feel alive, because aliveness in that house was too loud, too unpredictable, too risky. The messages weren't written down, but they were everywhere. Don't feel that. Don't say that. Don't need that. She was taught to be less, to shrink, to dim her light so others wouldn't feel exposed. And when she cried, she was told she was being dramatic. When she got angry, they called her disrespectful. When she dared to pull away, they guilted her back in. So she internalized the lesson. Your feelings are dangerous. Your needs are too much. Your boundaries will be punished. And worst of all, if something feels wrong, it's probably your fault. This curriculum is enforced not just by the narcissistic parent, but by the entire family system. Everyone plays their part. The golden child shines by staying aligned with the illusion. The enabler smooths over the cracks, protects the abuser's image, and shames the scapegoat for disturbing the peace. They all learn that loyalty to the dysfunction is more important than loyalty to truth. And so when she speaks up, she is not only abandoned, she is accused. But the worst betrayal is not the betrayal by others. It's the one she is taught to commit against herself. She begins to doubt her own memories, questions her own perception. She thinks, maybe I did overreact. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I just need to try harder. And so she tries. Over and over again, she tries to be what they want. She molds herself into something more palatable, more pleasing, more acceptable. And the more she does, the further she drifts from who she really is. Because this is the core of the narcissistic family wound, self-abandonment. Not as a flaw, but as a strategy, a necessary adaptation. She doesn't reject herself because she wants to. She rejects herself because it was the only way to keep the people she needed. And that fracture, that split between who she is and who she's allowed to be, becomes the root of so much later pain in relationships, in identity, in the inability to trust herself. As she grows, the wound doesn't vanish. It just gets more sophisticated. It shows up in partners who gaslight her, friends who drain her, bosses who exploit her. It shows up in how quickly she apologizes, how much she over-explains, how hard she works to avoid being seen as difficult. It shows up in her nervous system, the racing heart, the hypervigilance, the constant fear of doing something wrong, even when no one is watching. Because deep down, part of her still believes that being herself is a punishable offense. And the most devastating part? The world often confirms it, because society, too, is uncomfortable with truth-tellers. It rewards compliance. It praises those who smile through the pain, who don't make a fuss, who stay quiet to keep the peace. So when she starts to unravel the conditioning, when she starts to reclaim her truth, it doesn't always feel like empowerment. At first, it feels like loss. She loses the fantasy of the family she never really had. She loses the illusion of safety that came from self-denial. She loses the relationships that were only sustained by her silence. And that grief, that disorientation, is often mistaken for failure. But it's not failure, it's rebirth. It's the unraveling of a life built on survival. And in the rubble, something extraordinary begins to emerge. A remembering, a return. A voice that sounds strangely familiar, like an echo from before the conditioning. It whispers things that feel radical, but are in fact ancient truths. You are not too much. You were never too sensitive. Your needs are not a burden. Your anger is not wrong, it's sacred. Your boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity. It's a long road, this kind of healing. There are no shortcuts. No one arrives fully formed at the gates of self-trust. But she starts where all transformation begins, with the willingness to see clearly. And when she looks back, not through the lens of shame, but through the lens of truth, she doesn't see a broken child. She sees a brave one who felt everything because she couldn't not, one who noticed what no one else wanted to notice, one who held on to her soul, even when everyone else demanded she let it go. There is a quiet rebellion in surviving this kind of upbringing. A soft, holy defiance in saying, I will not betray myself anymore. It happens in small moments, in the boundaries that are set and upheld, in the emotions that are felt without apology, in the stories that are rewritten not to protect the guilty, but to free the innocent. And with each act of reclamation, she grows stronger, not louder necessarily, not more aggressive, but rooted, grounded, clear. Because clarity is power. And when you've spent your life being confused on purpose, confused by gaslighting, by guilt, by manipulation, clarity feels like rebellion, like fresh air, like truth. And truth, once it finds its way in, begins to illuminate everything. The roles, the lies, the stories that never belonged to her. She sees now how carefully she was trained to betray herself. But she also sees that unlearning is possible. That healing is not the erasure of pain, but the integration of it. That the same sensitivity she was shamed for is now the compass that guides her. That the same fire they tried to extinguish is what lights the way forward. And perhaps most radically of all, she begins to forgive herself. Not for what she did, but for what she had to do to survive. The masking, the people-pleasing, the silence, the rage, the clinging to hope where there was only harm. She forgives the version of herself who didn't know better because that version was a survivor. And survivors deserve compassion, not condemnation. This is the middle place, the liminal space between old identity and new embodiment. It's uncomfortable, disorienting, sacred, because it's here that she stops performing and starts becoming, not someone new, but someone true, the self that was always there, waiting beneath the noise. The curriculum she was handed taught her to betray herself, but the path she walks now teaches her something far greater: how to come home, to her body, to her truth, to her worth. And slowly, surely, she is beginning to trust what she knows: that she is not broken, that she is not bad, that she is not the villain. She is the one who woke up, and that changes everything. The awakening doesn't come all at once. It never does. It arrives slowly, quietly, like dawn breaking through a long black night. It's not loud or dramatic, more like a whisper that becomes a roar only after you've been listening for a while. For her, it began the moment she noticed that the problem wasn't her. It was the pattern, the repetition. The way the same stories kept unfolding in different costumes. Friendships that drained her, partners who criticized and withdrew, jobs where she overfunctioned and still felt invisible. For so long, she thought it was bad luck. Now she sees the mirror. The family system didn't just teach her how to relate to others, it taught her how to relate to herself. She had been trained to tolerate mistreatment, to dismiss red flags as overreactions, to confuse anxiety with attraction and tension with love. She had internalized the belief that if someone was upset, it was her fault, that her role in every relationship was to fix, to soothe, to disappear. But as she began to examine the root of those instincts, she saw it clearly. This wasn't fate. This was programming. And patterns, once seen, cannot be unseen. The shift is subtle, but it is everything. She begins to notice how quickly she says yes when her body is screaming no. She feels the adrenaline rush when she even thinks about setting a boundary. She sees the fear in her own eyes when someone disapproves of her. And instead of judging herself for it, she becomes curious. Who taught her that love is earned through sacrifice? Who taught her that speaking up makes her unsafe? Who taught her that her worth is conditional? She knows the answer, and it hurts. But in the space beneath that pain, something new begins to grow. Agency. For the first time, she understands that healing is not about fixing herself. It's about unlearning who she had to be in order to survive. It's about naming what was never hers to carry. It's about stepping outside the roles assigned to her and writing new ones from the inside out. And with that realization, her life begins to change. Not instantly, not without grief, but undeniably. She starts small. A no said with trembling lips. A phone call ended early. A holiday declined. A truth spoken even when her voice shakes. Each act feels terrifying but also holy. Because every time she honors herself, she dismantles the system that tried to erase her. And the world reacts. Some people pull away. Others lash out. Some act confused, as if they don't recognize her anymore. But she sees it now. Their confusion is not her responsibility. Their discomfort is not a reason to return to self-betrayal. She is not obligated to play a part just because it keeps the peace. Peace built on her silence was never peace at all. There is a deep loneliness in this phase, a shedding, a reckoning. She grieves not only for the family that never truly saw her, but for the versions of herself that clung to false hope. The little girl who thought if she was good enough, calm enough, pleasing enough, they would finally love her. She mourns the years lost to performing, to doubting, to shrinking. And yet, in that mourning, she also finds freedom. Because to grieve is to admit that something mattered, that she mattered. And that's the beginning of a new kind of self-respect. The awakening continues. She reads. She reflects. She surrounds herself with voices that speak her language, the language of truth, trauma, and reclamation. She begins to build relationships rooted not in trauma bonds, but in mutual respect. She learns to distinguish between connection and control, between intensity and intimacy, between guilt and guidance. She no longer trusts people just because they're familiar. She trusts herself first. And from that center, everything real can grow. Her nervous system begins to soften. She sleeps more deeply. Her body doesn't flinch the way it used to. She stops apologizing for her existence, stops over-explaining her decisions, stops editing herself to make others comfortable. She begins to really feel the fullness of her emotions. The rage that was once suppressed now fuels her boundaries. The grief that once overwhelmed her now deepens her compassion. The joy that once felt out of reach now visits her without warning, unfiltered, unearned, simply because she exists. There are still hard days, triggers, old stories that whisper in moments of doubt. But now she has tools. She has truth. She has language for the experiences that once left her voiceless. She understands that healing is not linear, but cyclical, a spiral staircase where each turn brings her closer to herself. And perhaps most powerfully, she begins to feel something she never imagined possible. Forgiveness. Not always for them, not yet. Maybe not ever, but for herself. For the survival patterns. For the lost time. For the ways she abandoned herself when she didn't know better. She forgives the part of her that clung to their approval because she didn't know she was already whole. This forgiveness is not fluffy. It is fierce. It's the kind of forgiveness that rises only when shame has been burned away by the fire of truth. It's what happens when you see your own innocence not as a weakness, but as a strength that was weaponized against you. She no longer feels ashamed of her softness. She sees it now for what it is, resilience in disguise. As she steps more fully into her power, she doesn't become hardened. She becomes whole. And wholeness is magnetic. People begin to notice. You seem different, they say. And she is. But not because she changed who she was, she simply stopped hiding it. The truth teller, the seer, the cycle breaker, she's been here all along, waiting to be chosen. And she chooses her. Not because it's easy, not because it guarantees a happy ending, but because choosing herself is the only way to live a life that's real. A life where love doesn't require self-erasure. A life where safety isn't earned by silence. A life where her story is hers to tell, and hers alone. This awakening is not an arrival. It's a practice, a becoming, and it is sacred. Because once the scapegoat sees the pattern, they don't just heal, they become a mirror, a lighthouse, a new possibility. They stop passing the wound forward. They start telling the truth, not to punish, but to liberate. And in doing so, they begin to reclaim not just their story, but their birthright. The birthright of being seen, of being believed, of being loved without conditions. She was never the villain. She was the one who refused to stay asleep. And now that she's awake, she will never go back. Healing, she learned, isn't something that happens only within a person, it echoes. The moment she began to heal, something shifted not only in her, but in the air around her, in the future unfolding beyond her. What started as an attempt to save herself became something far bigger, a quiet revolution. The cycle breaker's path is never about blame. It's about truth. It's about ending what never should have begun and beginning what was never allowed to exist. She no longer thought of herself as broken or dramatic or too sensitive. Those were names given to her by people who benefited from her silence. What she was awake. And awakening doesn't mean you're done hurting. It means you've finally stopped pretending that pain is normal, that manipulation is love, that survival is living. And when she stopped pretending, something deep inside her shifted. She could no longer carry what wasn't hers. She laid it down, the shame, the guilt, the stories written by other people's fear. She laid it all down not with rage, but with reverence. Because what she was really doing wasn't just walking away. She was building a bridge for the future to cross without carrying that same weight. She started choosing differently, not to prove a point, but to align with truth. She rested without guilt. She let go of relationships that drained her. She didn't explain her boundaries as apologies. She allowed herself joy without waiting for someone's permission. And slowly, the emptiness that once haunted her when she stepped out of the role began to fill with something softer, something real. Herself. It wasn't always easy. There were days when she missed the familiarity of dysfunction, not because it felt good, but because it was known. There were moments when she second-guessed her own clarity, when the old voices returned, whispering that she was overreacting or selfish or cruel. But she didn't let those voices drive anymore. She let them pass, like echoes from an old room she no longer lived in. And with every moment she chose herself not in rebellion, but in love, she became the ancestor she never had. She could feel it in her bones. The generations behind her, silent, aching, watching. The generations ahead, still forming, still dreaming. And she stood in the middle like a hinge, a fulcrum, a turning point. She wasn't just healing for herself. She was healing for the child she used to be, for the children she may one day guide, for the world that needed fewer survivors and more fully alive humans. This was her sacred inheritance, not what she was given, but what she would give forward. She built something from scratch, a life of her own design, a space where honesty didn't threaten connection, where softness wasn't seen as weakness, where emotional safety was the soil, not the reward. She became someone who could witness another's pain without abandoning herself, someone who didn't confuse intensity with love, someone who didn't disappear in relationships just to keep them. In time, the labels others gave her fell away. She was no longer the villain. She was the truth bearer, the mirror, the one who stopped pretending and started living. And in this new life, still imperfect, still in motion, she no longer needed their approval. She had given herself the thing she always longed for: safety, clarity, dignity. Her love was no longer currency, it was a gift. Freely given, never negotiated. And she began to tell her story, not to shame anyone, but to free herself. She told it plainly, with courage, each word an exhale, each sentence a release, and every time she spoke, someone else whispered, "Me too." She realized the truth had always been there, waiting for someone to say it out loud. And now that someone was her, she stopped asking, "What's wrong with me?" She started asking, "What happened to me?" And then, even more powerfully, "What's possible for me now?" Because she was no longer interested in surviving family dynamics. She was interested in living a full life, one rooted in truth, joy, and freedom. One that didn't demand her loyalty to dysfunction. One that welcomed all parts of her, the wild, the tender, the loud, the wise. All of it. She didn't need to be fixed. She needed to be heard, to be believed, to be loved without conditions. This is what it means to break the cycle. Not to become perfect, but to become real. Not to win against the past, but to stop reenacting it. To live as if she is free, because now she is. And with that freedom, she plants new seeds. For herself, for those watching, for the ones who will never even know her name, but will feel her legacy in the air they breathe. Because healing doesn't just stop pain, it births possibility. And she, who was once scapegoated, gaslit, and silenced, has become the one who tells the truth and lives in it. She was never the villain. She was the rewrite, the wild card. The new chapter, the cycle ends with her, and something beautiful begins. If any part of this story felt like yours, then you're not alone, you're not broken, and you are absolutely not too much. You're the one waking up, the one remembering who you were before the world told you to forget. And this story, this path, this new beginning is yours to claim. If you're ready to go deeper, to break the silence and finally come home to yourself, I've created something for you. A free guide that walks you through the first steps of reclaiming your voice, naming your truth, and releasing the guilt that never belonged to you. You'll also get weekly letters, thoughtful, honest, and healing, delivered to your inbox, written just for those walking this same road. You don't have to do it alone. You were never meant to. Start here. Begin again. Your story is not over. It's just finally being told in your voice.